Tonight on Bridge City News, more family ties between the Liberal cabinet and a big charity that got a source federal contract. Justin Trudeau is in the spotlight, now Bill Morneau is too. Alberta pharmacists are to begin offering tests for COVID-19. Stan Seawick Pool is now open as part of Phase 2.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition.
Good evening, I'm Loris Alexander. Thank you for joining us. The Prime Minister is under fire and facing new questions for an apparent conflict of interest. The opposition called for a criminal investigation because the We charity was granted a large federal contract with no competitive bidding after Justin Trudeau's mother and brother were paid a total of $300,000 to appear at We rallies. Now, Finance Minister Bill Morneau has also been shown to have family linked to the group. On June 25th, Alberta Health Minister Tyler Shandro announced expanded testing capacity at 20 pharmacies in the province. The move was an effort to make it even easier for Albertans to be tested.
Albertans expect us to do everything possible to protect them from COVID-19, and we're doing exactly that. That's why I'm pleased to announce that people with no symptoms will soon be able to get tested in community pharmacies, making it easier for Albertans to access testing so we can continue to slow the spread of COVID-19 throughout our province. In the coming days, a number of community pharmacies with the skills and capacity will offer testing to Albertans without symptoms and no known exposure to COVID-19. This is in addition to the robust COVID-19 testing that's already offered province-wide by Alberta Health Services. Now, this is a step that just makes sense. Pharmacists are highly trained health professionals, and pharmacies support the health care of residents in their communities every day. Testing is well within pharmacists' scope of practice and their competence. The pharmacy test is a throat swab, which will be sent then to Alberta Precision Labs for analysis. Now, to ensure safety, participating pharmacies will receive specialized training, and they will follow strict safety protocols.
We spoke to one pharmacy in Lethbridge selected for the pilot project.
Alberta Health wanted to roll out asymptomatic testing to the pharmacies because community pharmacies is a very accessible resource. And also we would certainly help to increase the goal to increase that per day testing of the asymptomatic patients too, and it will also reduce the load from the AHS screening centers because they have more stringent duties to do, like checking out the prevalence as well as taking care of those symptomatic patients. So yeah, it will also reduce the wait time on 811 for sure. It is a throat swab, so certainly much easier than what we used to have a nasal swab. So yeah, it won't be that much hurtful procedure. Patient will just gag and it's normal. It's same like a strep throat testing, but here it will be more PPEs and other cleaning protocols involved. Once we do the test, at the end of the day, we bring it to the community lab, and community lab sends to Calgary provincial lab, and then if the result is negative, then we let the patient know. If the result is positive, then certainly we let the patient know, but they'll also hear from the Alberta Health, and Alberta Health will also contact the patient's family doctor too. If the patient doesn't have a family doctor, then Alberta Health has implemented the policy that they would assign a doctor to patient, so patient is being taken care of.
Testing at pharmacies will not be facilitated through 811. As we begin to gradually reopen some recreation facilities as part of the Phase 2 relaunch, the city is reminding us to plan ahead before visiting a recreation facility such as the Stan Seawick Pool, which opens today.
We've put guidelines in place for the arenas and the pools that we're opening up this weekend, but as with everybody else, we've never done this before. So we've done the best effort that we can and working with our groups and trying to figure out what we can do, but we've really left it open for them to communicate back to us, because this is, as you said, this is the best effort. Is we really don't know what's going to happen once the people hit the facilities, so we're leaving it wide open that we'll make changes, we'll pivot as necessary, and do what we can do to make the experience better for our public and for the groups that are coming in. So we're really looking for that feedback as people come through, because unfortunately the reality of the situation is when people come in, what they're finding, we're not going to be able to be as flexible as we normally are in a situation. We're usually very responsive and try to get people out to things. This time we're following guidelines, and if we don't follow those guidelines, the authorities that be can shut our facilities down. So we're going to be very, very sticklerish with the rules and having to follow, not because we want to make things uncomfortable for the patrons, but because we want to keep our facilities open and keep moving into the future.
Organizers of Lethbridge Public Library's The Word on the Street Festival have announced that the event will go ahead in September. The format, however, will be modified.
This is our 10th year for The Word on the Street, and as many people know, normally we have a big party outside in the parking lot in the streets around the library. This year, like many other places, things look a little bit different. We're really happy to be able to still go ahead with the festival, but we're going to be running the program online. Because we usually bring in 20 to 30 authors and illustrators from all across Canada, right now we're pretty committed to doing online and streaming programming. We want to make sure that we're not running into any issues with either physical distancing or with travel restrictions or anything else. Everybody has been really good about the switch to online and very understanding, and we're just really happy that we're still able to continue with the event this year.
More information will be released as planning for the festival is finalized and closer to the end of summer. We all know individuals, businesses, or nonprofit organizations that have gone above and beyond to make the lives of others better during the COVID-19 crisis. Community heroes come from all backgrounds and perform all sorts of tasks to serve those within the Lethbridge area. MP Rachel Harder recognizes these heroes with a personalized certificate of appreciation. We spoke with one recipient of the pleasant surprise.
This was a good surprise. Yes, few community members told me that they put in my name for it, but I never knew that what we would get out of it. And then yesterday, when I went to check the mailbox, there was an envelope there, which was a hard file thing. And I was like, what is this? I was not expecting any courier or any mail. And then after I turned around and it was on the envelope itself, it said the name of our MP, and I was like, wow, this is something nice. So I went home, opened it up, and there was this certificate, which was a very, very proud moment. I would like to thank our Gujarati society, which gave me an opportunity to go out and help people in need, right? So in this COVID-19, people were only saying thank you to the frontline workers like doctors, nurses, and all that stuff. But there are a lot of other people in town. Like there is a whole lot of poverty line in town as well, which is our Lethbridge Soup Kitchen. They are the people, they don't know who they are serving every day. There is Food Bank, they don't know who is walking in their doors every day. There is Streets Alive, who they don't know who are walking inside. So they could have like people with COVID in there and they could get sick. But they all kept everything in line and they still did their work. So it gave me and the society an opportunity to go towards that and saying that, you know what, thank you. It's not only doctors and nurses. Yes, they are treating, they are the best people. But you know what, you guys are the one who are keeping our community alive.
For many long-standing businesses, this year has been unlike many prior, especially in terms of sales and operations. But how about for newer businesses? We talked to one husband and wife-owned business about trying to get off the ground while being uncertain of what the future holds.
We've had lots of good turnout so far with it. We came to the market because we wanted to kind of showcase our stuff and also get the name out, a little bit, so that people understand that, we're not just for hunters, it's general people that need spice in any way. My wife and myself own the business. We just started in December of last year, so we're fairly new. So learning lots. I think the farmers market's going to bring a lot more to us because we have people come in and they see, the sign, they take cards, and then once people see what we have, then we can, hopefully move more, of course. So We were going to a couple of gun shows this spring. Of course, got canceled, so that's kind of hurt us quite a bit, at first. But it's picking up slow. People are starting to notice us, and we're kind of hoping that we will see by fall that things will be a lot better, of course. But, I think it's like any other business. If it gets any worse, we're going to be, it'll be fairly slow. So, but I think we'll make it through. I don't think we don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of stuff. It's just a minimal amount that we can keep in that, until things have picked up where we can get better. By the end of, September, October, hopefully we'll see, a lot more people. Better for us too, of course, the more exposure that we get out there.
Recapping one of our top news stories. The Prime Minister is under fire and facing new questions for an apparent conflict of interest. The opposition called for a criminal investigation because the We charity was granted a large federal contract with no competitive bidding after Justin Trudeau's mother and brother were paid a total of $300,000 to appear at We rallies. Now, Finance Minister Bill Morneau has also been shown to have family linked to the group. And a look at weekend weather. Tonight, mainly sunny in the evening, becoming partly cloudy overnight with a low of 15. Tomorrow, a high of 23 with a 30% chance of showers and risk of a thunderstorm later in the afternoon. Family caregivers are usually relatives, neighbors, friends, or close acquaintances who undertake a challenging role but aren't necessarily paid for it. BCN's Jeanette Roche spoke with one exceptional man about his own personal experience as a caregiver to his wife. That interview is up next.
Caregivers are an essential part of everyday living for millions of Canadians. It's an intense, high-stress job with many rewarding moments. Today's guest has personal experience in this area, and he's cared for his beautiful wife, Gracie, who lives with severe disabilities for 33 plus years. He is the host of the weekly radio show, Hope for the Caregiver, president of Standing with Hope, and author of the book, Hope for the Caregiver. Peter Rosenberger, welcome to the show. It's so great to have you on today.
It is a treat to be with you all.
So, Peter, tell us, how many people are caregivers in the United States? And I believe you have statistics on Canada as well.
Well, it's a hard number to actually quantify because a lot of times they talk about caregivers for those who are caring for the aging, senior citizens and so forth, and that's about a 42 million number in America. But then you throw in special needs children, then you throw in mentally ill, then you throw in what I do on my show and what I talk about, alcoholics and addicts. That alcoholism and addiction is a chronic impairment. Even if you're in recovery, you're still dealing with that impairment. And anybody that's in the orbit of that individual, they know that individual is chronically impaired. And that wherever you find somebody who's chronically impaired, you're going to find a caregiver. So most experts in the United States are hovering around that 65 million range for the family caregiver in the United States. And in Canada, it's 8 to 11 million. It's hard to quantify that number because a lot of people don't identify as such. They don't think of themselves as a caregiver. I did a whole bit a couple of years ago with comedian Jeff Foxworthy on You Might Be a Caregiver If. Wow. And, if you've ever hooked up your wife's wheelchair to your dog just to see if it would work, you're probably a caregiver. I mean, that's, I was trying to do something that would kind of make people think of a little bit different about that. And it's okay to laugh at that, by the way. That's funny. And, if you get more than 6 Christmas cards from a doctor, you're probably a caregiver, so people don't think of themselves as such. And I'm helping reframe that conversation so people understand, why is this important? What am I doing here? Where's this going? And how do I do it better or safer?
Yeah. Now, you are a caregiver yourself. Let's talk about how you became one and what has the journey been like for you?
Well, I became one when I said I do, and then I did, because my wife was hurt several years before I even met her. She had a really bad car wreck when she was a teenager, 17 years old. She had the world by the tail. and she was at school at a music school in Nashville, Tennessee. I was at a different school in South Carolina at the time. Didn't know her. I transferred in as she was recuperating out of after the wreck. She came back, and friends said, "You got to meet this girl." And they said she's had a really bad wreck, but you guys are going to really hit it off. And she's the most spunky girl. You talked to her yesterday. She's got a personality as big as the state we live in, which is Montana, and beautiful, beautiful young gal. I mean, when I saw her, I mean, I was, don't take my word for it, Google her. I was Googling her that day. We didn't even have Google back then. and then I heard her sing, and I was a pianist. She's a singer, and it was all over at that point, and I knew I was going to take care of her. She had a limp. I saw some scars on her lower legs at first, and I knew that she'd had some tough times, but had no concept of this, of what this meant. She'd had about 20 surgeries by the time I met her in the mid-'80s. We got married, and the doctor said, look, if you guys are going to have kids, you have them when you're young. And so I went to her and I said, baby, doctor says we got to do this. And I got a prescription and everything. And I don't know if that's covered under Obamacare, but I bet you that's covered under Clinton care. So we had 2 children, but it accelerated some of that's funny, by the way. Y'all could laugh at that. That is just really funny. And y'all should laugh harder. But we had our sons, and after each son, she gave up one of her legs. It just accelerated the damage that was going on with her crushed limbs. The surgeries just kept mounting. To date that I could count, she's had 80 that I can count, and about another 150 smaller procedures. She's been treated by over 100 doctors in 12 different hospitals, and the bill is now well over 11 million. It just keeps growing. It's really kind of hard to keep track of all of it. I'm ballparking on that one, and that's a low ballpark. So she lives with severe pain all the time, and not known a day without it since Reagan was president in his first term. So that's a long time to deal with disability and challenges and heartache and frustration. And I've come to understand where the real battle is for the family caregiver. And it's and this is why I wrote the book. This is why I did the show. This is why I'm here with you today, because I understand how dark and discouraging those places can be when you're having a late night conversation with the ceiling fan, thinking, "Oh Lord, what am I going to do?" Mm-hmm. And so that's my story.
Yeah, it's unbelievable what you two have been through, and I can see that you use humor a lot, which is great. It's a great coping mechanism.
I like to call it humor.
Yeah.
From your reaction, I was unclear if it was humor, but some things don't translate to Canada. I don't know. I don't know what that's all about.
Don't worry about it. Everyone will get it. Okay, so obviously you've got a lot of experience in this. What kind of advice can you give to those who might recognize that they could eventually become a caregiver, possibly to like aging parents? Is there anything that they can do to plan for it?
Yes. First off, if you love somebody, you will probably be a caregiver. If you live long enough, you're probably going to need one. So we all got a stake in this. It's a slow, creeping reality that we don't think about because we're always so busy right here in the here and now. But there's several things you can do to prepare for this. One of them is make sure your home is ready. When you're 50, 60 years old, don't go buy a 3-story home with a whole lot of stairs and the living part is way up on top. Don't do that. That's not a good idea. Make sure that you've got wider doorways, handicap accessible things. We're all one sprained ankle away from being in a tough situation in our own home. So let's go ahead and plan for that. Another thing is we've got to start taking care of ourselves and being good stewards, planning financially, planning physically with our bodies and things such as that, because it is coming. And then if you have a special needs child that comes in, all of a sudden you've brought this child into the world, there are things to prepare for that once that reality hits of what you can do. And but it all starts with the heart. And my message is for caregivers: healthy caregivers make better caregivers. Mm-hmm. And if you're morbidly obese, how is that going to help you take care of someone else? I see too many people who are really heavy pushing wheelchairs. And I know it. I wrote a book called 7 Caregiver Landmines. Excessive weight gain is one of those. I know. I got so big it took 2 dogs to bark at me. I know. I get it. we reach for the comfort food. That was funny, by the way, too. And it's, I got a million of those. I got so big I broke my family tree. I mean, I got big, and I understand that, but we've got to dial that back in. But the heavy weight that we really carry is not around our waist; it's around our heart. And so what I do is try to speak to that heart of the caregiver to let them know, number one, if you're in this situation right now, which there are millions of people in Canada dealing with this right now, you're in this situation now. Hey, you know what? You didn't cause it. You can't cure it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's not yours to fix. You're a steward of this. Now, we don't talk about stewardship a lot in our society. I don't know what you guys do up there in Canada, but in America, we're $24 trillion in debt. Stewardship is clearly not on the top of mind of everybody in America. And we got people burning down our cities and everything else. Stewardship is not where our headspace is. But for caregivers, that's where it has to be. It really has to be for all of us, but I'm just going to focus on caregivers.
Mm-hmm.
We are stewards of somebody who is suffering or impaired or struggling. We are not owners or fixers. That's the big thing to keep in mind. You can't fix these things. I don't have any power over amputation. My wife's lost both legs, and her body is orthopedically a train wreck. I have no power over that, but I have a lot of power over being a jerk.
Absolutely. That's right.
I got a lot of power over that. And so that's where the battle is for us as caregivers. Can we live peacefully with things that we don't particularly like?
Right. Now, in your book, you use 3 positive words for high stress moments. They are wait, water, and walk. What do you mean by that?
Well, I never have to make amends for something I didn't say. And sometimes we are so quick to blurt out some stuff and we want to jump into it. And for us as caregivers, we're often required to learn to bite our tongue and enjoy the taste of blood, because we want to pop off and say things. Just wait, just breathe, just take a deep breath, 4 seconds in, 8 seconds out, and calm yourself down. If that's not enough, drink some water. A lot of times we reach for sodas or high sugary drinks or whatever. Please, for all that is good in this world, avoid drinking things like Red Bull as a caregiver. It is not good for you. And we don't need to be so amped up. Our life is like this anyway. So drink some water, drink to think. We need to hydrate, and water gives us a chance to get our blood pressure down. Also, it fills our mouth with something besides words. We don't always have to go to every fight we get a ticket to. They're going to say things that or family members are going to say things, or doctors or nurses, or somebody's going to say, pastors, church people come up to you. Well, if you had enough faith, you wouldn't be going through this. Well, they don't say that to me anymore. I'm a 2nd-degree black belt, so I usually know how to deal with that kind of nonsense. And I'm helping help people get better theology in this too, because we got really terrible theology when it comes to suffering. But drink. Okay, just drinks. Let me clarify. Drink water. just clarify that.
Don't drink red wine, is what you're saying.
And the last thing is go for a walk if you need to. Wait, water, walk. You don't have to engage on all these things. It's okay to let some of this go.
That's interesting. It's good advice, too. Now, in your book, you also mentioned that there are 6 major impact areas affected by caregiving. What are they?
Well, you got your health, your emotions, your lifestyle, your profession, your money, and your endurance. You put it all together, it says, help me. And that's the cry for us as caregivers. All of these things are affected, but it starts with your heart. If your head and heart are squirrely, guess what? Your wallet will soon follow. If you are a train wreck in your darkest places in your heart, guess what? Your body will soon be that way too. It's just, and so if we can detangle this stuff in the heart, then we give every part of our living existence a fighting chance in dealing with these realities. So that's where I focus, but it's always about help me, not help us, not help her, help me. Mm-hmm. Because if I'm in a good place, my wife, who has all these things going on with her, has a fair shot at having some things help with her. But if I'm in a bad place, what's going to happen to her?
Yeah, it's almost like the caregiver needs a caregiver sometimes, right? It sounds like such a hard job.
I don't give a lot of instruction to my fellow caregivers on the air or anywhere else. What I try to give is reminders. because I think that's where our battle is. You can't tell me how to take care of my wife. I can't tell you how to take care of your family member, but we can remind each other of where safety is. In the Army, sometimes the leader is the guy that remembers where the Jeep is parked, you know? And we can remind each other of where safety is. Have you seen your doctor lately? Have you been to a counselor lately? When's the last time that you went for a walk?
Right. And
Yeah.
that's good advice for the caregivers. You also mentioned that there are 3 I's that every caregiver suffers from. What are they?
Every one of us lose their independence, we become isolated, and then we lose our identity. And that loss of identity is such a debilitating thing for family caregivers. Ask a caregiver, how are you doing? And they say, well, she had a bad night, or I'm not doing, she had a bad night, or he's had a bad night, or we're not doing so well. They struggle with saying I. And so what I do on my show, when I have a caller that calls, it's a live show, and I always ask, how are you feeling? And it's amazing how many times they have to start and reposition again to be able to go back and say, I'm tired, I'm scared, I'm just hacked off. I don't know what to do. I don't care what comes after the word I. We can have a real conversation at that point, because then they start speaking, and they're probably stuttering, and tears will fill up their eyes. I've seen this over and over and over when they start speaking from their heart. But I try to give them enough space to be able to do that so that they can express what's going on there, get it all on the table. Now let's have a real conversation.
Oh, that's so interesting. And you're absolutely right. You do lose your identity, and you start to take on, almost project your personality onto the other person, or they get projected back onto you. That is so interesting. And it really drives home the fact of how much caregivers need other people in their lives too, right? Like counseling. And I would imagine they suffer from guilt a lot of times, and worry, and just all kinds of stresses.
Guilt really, really cripples caregivers.
Yeah.
I call it part of the fog of caregivers: fear, obligation, and guilt. And we get lost in the fog.
Yeah.
Parents feel guilty for bringing a child into this world with special needs. You feel guilty if your loved one can't get up and go and just stand up and take a shower. You feel guilty if you can get up and go and walk around the block and they can't. There are a lot of things to feel, not just sins that get great press. There are a lot of things to feel guilty about. You feel guilty if you just want to sit down and watch a television show uninterrupted for an hour.
Wow.
I try to help caregivers work through that a little bit and start using the word grace. I love that word grace. It's my favorite word in the English language. I married a woman named Grace, and I love the word grace. And we've got to learn how to apply that in our own lives so that we can live peacefully with very, very painful things.
Well, Peter Rosenberger, we are out of time, unfortunately. I would love to go on talking to you for hours and hours, and I'm sure you have so much to say on this topic. Thank you so much for joining us today, though.
Thanks for having me.
The climate change debate seems to be ramping up more and more. In Canada, we see protesters staging blockades, resulting in the shutdown of parts of national railway lines. Gregory Wright-Stone is here to discuss climate change. He likes talking about it. He's a geologist and author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Inconvenient Facts. Gregory, welcome to BCN.
Oh, good to have you on. There's so many things to talk about.
Oh, you bet. First of all, let's talk about your book and what you're really hoping to accomplish with it.
Yeah, I did not set out to write a book, which is unusual. Most people sit down and say, I'm going to write a book. I set out to seek the truth. And it was this search for the truth that really led what I found as I started diving into each one of these various aspects of climate change. I frankly, as a geologist, I was just shocked by the level of misinformation that's out there. Just one climate apocalypse description after another just proved not to be so, that the science, the facts, and the data, it just didn't back up so much what we're being told. So as I started diving into it, I became more and more angry. And I started talking a lot about it, and people were fascinated with the information that I'm providing, these inconvenient facts that run counter to the notion of what they call the consensus opinion. In other words, it's man-made global warming that's then driving apocalyptic and horrific climate-related events. And I'm a really, really big proponent of the many benefits of modest warming and increased CO2 And we can talk a little bit more and dive into that as we go forward. But that's really my message. You don't get this, is that we've actually got an Earth and its ecosystems that are thriving and benefiting, and humanity's benefiting as a result.
Now, according to many scientists around the world, the Earth is warming at a dangerously high rate with dire consequences. What is your perspective on this? Is the Earth really warming? Is it that much of a serious issue?
It is warming. We're in a warming trend. It's been warming, but the key here is, when did that warming trend start? It started in the late 17th century, bringing us out of the death-dealing cold of what was called the Little Ice Age. Half the population of Iceland perished during that time. A third of the population of the world was thought to have perished during the horrific cold of the Little Ice Age. So this was really a beneficial warming. So it started warming more than 300 years ago, and it's been warming in fits and starts ever since. If we look, the United States really has the best surface temperature data measurement system. They've got one they established in 2003 that gets rid of what's called the urban heat island effect. None of this data from this system has been massaged or manipulated like so many other of the data it has been. And we see here in the United States, I know we're talking to you from Canada, but in the United States, we've seen zero warming. I mean, the temperature is going like this, it's going up and down. But in the last 16 years, we've ended up at the same point we started 16 years ago. I think it's likely to begin warming again here, but it's nothing again that's unusual and unprecedented. And if we look over the last period since the end of the last ice age, we find that there have been 9 other warming periods that look very similar to what we see today. So again, we look back and see that these warming periods are nothing unusual, nothing unprecedented. And I'll tell you one thing that I find fascinating, and a lot of people tell me about my book, the section of the book, is I like to look at human history, human civilization over the last several thousand years and put that into the perspective of climate change. And what we find is that each of the previous warming periods, they're called the Minoan, the Roman warm period, the time of Christ, the medieval warm period, each one of these warming periods, similar to what we have today, all were associated with increases in civilizations, technology, food was plentiful, and these were warmer periods, just opposite of what we're being told, isn't it? We're being told fear the heat, when actually each one of the intervening cold periods were marked by famine, pestilence, and mass depopulation. And again, it's just opposite of what we're being told. So there's a great correlation between the rise and fall of temperature and the rise and fall of civilizations. Fear the cold.
Is an increased amount of CO2 really bad for the Earth? We hear all of the time how it's important to cut down on our carbon footprint.
No, and in fact, if you would look on the back of my white SUV, I've got a bumper sticker that says, "I love CO2," and I was at the gym this morning wearing my I Heart CO2 t-shirt. So no, I'm a huge proponent of the many benefits of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide's fueling plant and crop growth. Carbon dioxide increases means that each of the plants don't need as much water. Think about it. Because of the CO2, there's the photosynthesis process. They use CO2. With more CO2 in the atmosphere, they don't have to, what we call transpiration, it's breathing in and out. They don't have to, because they don't need to do that because there's so much more CO2. And that means they're not losing water. They're not sucking it out of the ground. And again, what's fascinating, we don't hear about it, but because they're not using as much water, that leaves more water in the soil. Increased soil moisture is leading thought to be part of what's leading to a decrease in forest fires and a decrease in drought. Again, just opposite of what you're being told and what the media promotes. It's crazy. It's just one thing after another. It's being misrepresented to you and your listeners.
Do we have an accurate way of knowing how much CO2 is actually in our atmosphere is man-made as opposed to the CO2 that comes from natural sources?
Well, we've increased CO2. We're at about, I'm not going to throw out a bunch of numbers, but we're at about 410 parts per million right now. So we've increased 130 parts per million since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. If we look at it throughout Earth's history, though, we find, again, we're at 400 more or less, a little bit over 400. Throughout all of Earth's history, the average CO2 levels were 2,600 parts per million. 2,600, 6.5 times what we are today. And plants, ecosystems thrived. And so if you really look at it, we're actually, compared to Earth's history, and as a geologist, that's what I do. If you put it in the big perspective, we don't have too much CO2. We don't have enough. We're actually CO2 impoverished. And again, it's fueling Dr. Craig Idso and his team of researchers have done laboratory studies to determine what exactly, he used a 300 part per million increase in CO2. What would that do to plant and crop growth? And he looked at crops that represent 95% of the crops that we rely on for sustenance. And he found that some benefit more, some less. They all benefit to some degree. But the average was an increase of 46% of biomass, the weight of crop growth. That's a good thing. That's not just a good thing, it's a really good thing. And because of increased CO2, we can feed the hungry. And around the world, people are benefiting from this. And that's a really, really, really good thing. I'm a senior fellow at the Cornwall Alliance, which is a Christian group. And the overarching theme that I use, and I've kind of adopted it from them, is this belief that we should use all of Earth's resources, or what they would say all of God's creation, for the betterment of mankind, and do it as good stewards. And that's a really simple way for your viewers to look at this. We want to use all of Earth's resources for the betterment of mankind and do it as good stewards. And that's a tremendous philosophy. Instead of what we see here are so many people in leadership of countries and other groups that are promoting things like the Green New Deal, things like the Paris Climate Accords, that would actually impact and harm the people of Canada and the people of the United States and the people of the Western world by making everything, their intention and their goal from each one of these is to increase energy costs, which would then increase costs for everybody. And energy costs, when you do that, that's really a regressive taxation system and by that I mean it impacts the poorest among us the most.
Has there been any research done, though, on the alarming climate change predictions that have actually come true over the past 2 or 3 decades? Do we have any statistics on that?
Well, I can't give you statistics, but I've got a laundry list that's now going well into the second page of, I'm working on my second book, and that'll be part of it is kind of an addendum of the failed climate change forecasts that have just gone wrong. And before I came on here, I did some research and used the model for the assessment of greenhouse gas induced climate change. It's a big name, but the acronym is the MAGIC, MAGICC simulator. And I used the IPCC's own calculations to determine if Canada reduced 100% of its CO2 emissions, how much warming would be averted. And again, this is using their own calculations. So what they want Canada to do is to impose economically crippling sanctions, regulations, taxes, in order to drive down. And I'll read you off here. Canada, the temperature, amount of temperature that would be averted would be 0.06 of a degree centigrade by the year 2050, and it gets better, 1/100th of a degree centigrade by the year 2100. How many jobs lost in Canada is that worth? I'll tell you how many. 0. For 1/100th of a degree centigrade by the year 2100. And that's what they're after. And this is using their own calculations. And I know you would join with me by shaking your head and going, why in the world would we do this? It's crazy. We just see all these negatives. Every one of your viewers' personal liberties would be infringed even more than they are today.
You know what? Maybe a lot of it's to do with the money. You got to follow the money. That's what my father used to say. Look at a lot of the Hollywood movies, the propaganda that they're pushing. They make big bucks off of it. Green technology. I mean, it's multi-billion-dollar industry. It's huge.
Yeah, it is. And I shake my head sometimes when I look at these things. I'm just asking myself, why are they doing it? That's really getting, I have to take off my geologist, scientist hat and put on my political science hat. And I get asked this question, well, you're telling us we're being lied to. Why are they doing it? I mean, you're just as qualified as I am. And everyone watching this is just as qualified as I am to come up with reasons why they're doing it. We can talk about taxation. It's going to be this big pot of money for each government. They like that. Greater control, is it turning more of the responsibility over to the UN? I don't know. It's always a good question. What I try and do when I get asked that question, but why, I always say, "What? I'm a scientist, and I can show you the science, the facts, and the data that says they're lying about this, they're lying about that. The media says this, and I can show the data that disputes it." And there's some, probably one of the ones that was so obvious and really, really irritated me was this. Back in November, the United Nations issued this report on a pending mass extinction. And they reported that up to 1 million species would go extinct over the next several decades. Well, for that to happen, you'd have to have 25,000 to 30,000 species go extinct per year. Well, I went back, my alarm started going off when I read this. And I went back and I said, okay, I went back and looked at the exact same data the UN used. The UN only looked at one data point per century and then added one on top of the other. Their chart looked like it looked really scary. I went back and looked at the same data on a decade by decade basis to show a significant decline for the last 120 years, completely opposite of what the UN. And remember I said you needed up to 30,000 extinctions per year? You know what it's been for the last 40 years? Two extinctions per year, not 2,000, not 200, 2 extinctions per year. And they're going to say, oh, well, we'll get to 30,000 pretty soon. No, we won't. No, we won't. And the big story from that UN study should have been, oh, we're going into this mass extinction event. What they should have said, we're doing as humanity, we're doing a really, really good job protecting our endangered species, and we should be proud of it.
Teenage climate activist Greta Thunberg will be the focus of a forthcoming BBC documentary series. Gregory, should young people on the other side of the debate also have their voices heard?
They should, but one should also have it based on science and fact. There's so much of what she thinks she knows that's incorrect, and there's so much about the climate change science that she's just blissfully unaware of, or maybe, and I think she is. I'm not going to impugn her with, but I will say I might have been wrong about her for the last several months. I've been calling her anti-capitalist, but she just signed this lucrative deal to do this documentary, so maybe she is a capitalist after all. The people in the BBC that are funding the BBC are outraged about this. And the funny thing is, this documentary will be on her, and it's being done under their science, the aegis of the science part of the BBC for this documentary on climate. It would be like saying, I compare it to doing a documentary on Thomas the Tank Engine and calling that a documentary on the history of railroads in Canada. There's going to be very little science, but a lot of political spin.
Gregory Wrightstone is a geologist and author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Inconvenient Facts. Thanks for joining me today from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Thank you.
As our scientific abilities continue to advance, it is becoming possible to erase traumatic memories from our brains. Some believe this has great potential to help, but others, however, who see some ethical challenges with this. Joining me now to talk about it is Dr. Jeff Zwierig. He's an astrophysicist and a senior research scholar with Reasons to Believe. It's an organization which combines science together with faith. Jeff, welcome to BCN.
Enjoy being here. Thanks for the invitation.
You bet. Is it actually possible now to wipe out traumatic memories with technology? And how does that process actually work?
Well, as I understand it, it's not possible to actually wipe out the memory, although we do seem to have the capacity to kind of remove some of the physiological effects. So, for example, if you had a traumatic memory and now you have trouble seeing dogs, if you will, or when dogs come around, you get anxious and very disturbed, you can actually do things to eliminate the response to that, even though you can't wipe out the memory, the traumatic experience with the dog.
Could this possibly help someone who's been sexually abused as a child in the past, or perhaps someone who was traumatized by a terrible car accident?
That, I think, is one of the very interesting outcomes of this research, is that it does look like we can actually help people who've been in traumatic experiences, and those traumatic experiences drive a lot of how their body responds to things, that we can actually help them dissociate the traumatic response and to be able to live a more healthy, more functional life that isn't driven by the traumatic experience.
Now, we form memories each and every day, Jeff, and I would venture to guess that these memories actually create part of our identity, our personality. So why do we really want to mess with them?
You know, that's a really good question, and I think we ought to be incredibly careful about how we do this, because how our mind works and what we think, it's a very complicated process and system, if you will. And so we do want to be very careful about how we go in and manipulate it, because we actually could cause a lot of unwanted side effects if we're not very careful how we do that.
Now, do memories help us decide what is morally right and what's wrong?
I think the standard or a moral code helps us decide what's right or wrong, but certainly our memories play into that because, you know, anytime I'm deciding right or wrong, I don't want to go have to look up a book and remember the code. I actually have it in my mind so that I can remember it. And so if we want to make sure that we don't hinder our ability to recall things so that we can make those decisions in the moment rather than having to always go look things up, if you will.
Erasing a horrible abuse experience is one thing, but would people then use this to erase an embarrassing moment? Let's say they did something at a Christmas party that they're really not proud of?
I can't see that wouldn't be done. You know, this seems like a technology that has great potential, but any technology that has great potential for good can also be used for detrimental purposes. And so if you can erase the bad effects of a traumatic experience in the past, you can also erase the inhibitions that would come from having done something embarrassing, so that even though you remember the event, you wouldn't be embarrassed by it, if you will.
So what are some of the other potential drawbacks, as you see them, to erasing bad memories?
I think there's just a part of this that we need to be careful when we're working with a very complicated system. You know, I do a lot of work on cars and other things, and I can imagine driving my car down the road and you know, something happens and now there's something flapping inside the car and it's making a really annoying noise. And I could just take a very simplistic approach of saying, oh, let's just go remove that bolt and throw it away. It's rattling around. Well, that bolt probably did something else. And so if I don't fix it right, I'm going to cause other problems. And so that's what I see tinkering with memory. We've got to be very careful that we might be able to do something very good to help people that have very traumatic experiences. And I think that would be beneficial. But if we're just kind of tinkering around with people in kind of the ordinary aspects of life, we could very easily introduce some unwanted effects. And those are going to be very hard to predict ahead of time, simply because the human mind is such a complicated piece of equipment.
Do our traumatic memories maybe serve us in any way? In other words, do we need negative experiences to really learn from them?
It really does seem that. I know a lot of how I behave in a situation is informed by how things have happened in the past. There are things that I just instinctively, it's like my body responds and says, oh, be cautious, be careful here. And so what's happened in the past helps me navigate in the moment of the day, because there's kind of this idea that, well, I'll just kind of think logically and work through everything. And the reality of it is I don't have time to do all that in the moment. And so those past experiences where, hey, this worked well, ooh, this worked poorly, inform me and allow me to make those decisions that I'm confronted with each and every day. And I have to make a decision on the spur of the moment.
So how do we really learn from a bad relationship if we can't even remember it? I'm thinking we're going to be repeating the same mistakes over and over again.
Well, I think that's right. You know, I'm kind of reminded of what the Bible says, that the Bible encourages us to think on the things that are honorable and true and pure and right, because as we do that, we're reinforcing that that's the way we're going to behave in the future. So if we don't have those bad memories, we can't learn from them to avoid them in the future. In the same way that having good experiences help inform us and make good choices in the future. And so I think we just want to be very careful about trying to remove memories. And I will make this comment. As of right now, I'm not aware of any ability to remove the memories are there. What we can do is dissociate some of the physiological effects of, say I'm terrified of spiders. I can remove the physiological fight or flight response that comes with that so that I can make a more informed decision, so that I can think and behave rationally in the moment. I can't actually get rid of the traumatic memory. It's still there. It's just how does it influence me in this particular instance?
Do we really need the past to give us proper perspective on the present? What are your thoughts?
I think the past is an incredibly important thing. It does help us understand what's going on in the moment. And with memories, again, I think there's this tendency to think of just the memory and that's all that's important. But there's a whole lot that goes into the memory. There's how your body responds. Did you think about it well? Did you think about it poorly? Have you gone back and rethought about it in light of the truth? All of those past things inform what I do each and every moment of every day. And so I think going in and tinkering with our memories and how we respond to them can have a lot of impact, unwanted or unintentional consequences of what may go on in my decision making each and every moment of each and every day.
I heard that there were some scientists who believe that our memories are often interlocked, one memory together with other ones. So maybe potentially erasing one bad memory, would that affect some of the other ones?
I don't see how it couldn't. Again, our minds are very complicated, and what's going on in the brain when you have a memory is that there's new connections being formed, but those connections are connected to other things. And so if we're trying to destroy one connection or remove one memory, that's going to take those connections away, but that's going to have consequences throughout the brain. And again, a lot of the consequences of that we may not be able to predict ahead of time.
Apparently, even though a memory could potentially be erased, our subconsciousness will still retain the emotions that come along with that bad memory. Only now the context of those negative emotions are not there. Do you see that as potentially being problematic?
Yes, it is, because if you've now separated the emotions from the physiological response or the emotions from the event itself, you've got these emotions floating around, but you have no context for being able to process them. I know some people know how to process emotions real well. I struggle with that. And a lot of what helps me process the emotions is being able to think through, remember the events, analyze what happened, and think rightly about it. Well, now if those are separated, I now have no longer any good way of processing those emotions to help them keep from driving my life and make and influence decisions, future decisions, in a detrimental way.
Now, considering that there's so much we do not yet know about how our memory works, is it best to not play God and just learn to cope with traumatic memories?
I think we need to be very careful. And I think to the extent you can cope with traumatic memories using just the tools, like I said, that the Bible talks about, thinking about what's true and honorable and right and pure and lovely, that would be ideal. But what I do see the advantage of this is that sometimes, as try as I may, my head hurts and I can't get rid of it. And so I take aspirin. That helps me deal with the pain so that I can do things appropriately or properly. Well, I do think this sort of therapy would help people who are just paralyzed or unduly burdened by traumatic experiences. It will help them get past the traumatic experience so that they can deal with things in a more healthy way. And I think that's a good benefit, but we need to be careful about using it and thinking it's a miracle cure for every bad experience we've ever had.
Where do you think this field of science will actually go over the next 10 or 20 years?
I'm thinking it will help us understand how the mind actually works. Again, it's a very complicated process of how we think. What does consciousness mean? How do we understand past events? How do we think about future events? How do we feel? And how does that all integrate together? The more we can understand how that works, the more we can actually use that information to help and benefit people. So rather than kind of having it be a black box where I know if I put this little drug in, it does this, the more we understand that process, the better we're going to be able to use it to help people who desperately need the help.
I'm kind of thinking at the same time, instead of removing some of those potential memories, how about implanting some fake memories, like Total Recall, that movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, redone, I think, with Colin Farrell. How about we plant in a memory of I was in a tropical vacation somewhere, instead of actually paying the big bucks to go there?
Well, yeah, it does seem like there's some capacity to do that. And people who've been involved in this research can show that you can actually convince people they were involved in committing a crime that they didn't actually commit. And so there are techniques and processes, even without using the drugs, brain function inhibiting drugs that you can use to do that. And so we'd like to think, oh, if I just have all these memories of idyllic environments, that'll be great. But the reality of it is you've got these memories that aren't connected with what actually happened. And anytime we obscure the way things really work, that often works to our detriment. And so while it may seem like it'd be great and a good time, again, that's almost certainly going to have negative consequences later.
Dr. Jeff Zwirink is an astrophysicist and a senior researcher scholar with Reasons to Believe. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.